Hey everyone, so I finally did it. I finally lowered my performance Model 3 and I'm pretty excited, okay? Because number one issue with this car when I bought it, I gotta say, is that it looks like a 4x4, okay? You know, a lot of the Model 3s look this way. I don't want to it's not just this performance model, but this is a performance model and it's still sitting up so high. I was like, well, what are you doing, off-road with this thing? So maybe surprisingly, I want to get some new wheels and tires for this car. And they never look as good when the car is sitting up at, like, call it OEM height, okay? Especially with this car. Sitting up too high, this gap was way too big. The fitment on the wheels it's okay, but it's not ideal. So I really want to improve the looks of this car. And if we look at my old model, my 2018, I've got it sitting and looking pretty much ideal. It might be a little too low, all right? I've got to admit it might be a little bit too low, but it looks so much better, all right? So much better. Let's take a look at that right now. I mean, look at this. Very little gap. Very little gap. The wheels are, if you can see, the offset is way better, but most importantly, it's sitting at a much more ideal height, in my opinion. So in this video, the first thing I'm going to do is tell you what I like and what I don't like. And keep in mind, these springs, okay, Eibach doesn't make springs for the 2024 Model 3 Performance yet. I ended up using springs for the 2023 Model 3 Performance, and it's really a completely different car. So what they promise on this kit for the 2023 does not necessarily work out in the 2024, and we'll get to a little bit more of that in the section of what I don't like. First, I'm going to tell you why I changed only the springs. Then I'm going to show you a couple of specialty tools that you will need. We're going to do an unboxing and then take a closer look and compare these springs with the OEM springs and talk about things like the weight, pretty big difference there. Then full install, okay? Full install, and this is like a DIY first time install, and it's a really good video. Then I'm going to show you a bunch of other pics and video of the car with these new springs on it. Okay, first, what I like. Comfort. All right, if you like the OEM ride, you're going to like these springs, okay? Because they work and ride just like OEM. I'm not sure I could notice a difference other than the car being a little bit lower. I can't say I notice a difference in the ride. So maybe that's a good thing for you, because, and I think it's a good thing for me too so far, because I'm not going to be tracking the car. I just want the car, mostly I just want it to look better. But in doing so, in lowering the car, it also will make it handle better. It's going to feel better too. And I don't want to sacrifice a lot of ride quality. Now, what's great about this car is that it's got the adaptive suspension. So, you can set it to a more casual ride comfort and, a more sporty ride. And all of that can be done in the car, adjusting the shock, which will change the ride quality. Okay, a couple things that I don't like, which I already talked about a little bit. The weight, first off, these are heavier, all right? And I show you exactly how much more. It's not a huge additional weight, but more weight on an EV, or actually more weight on any car you're trying to get more performance out of, is not a good thing. Okay, and then probably the biggest thing that I don't care for is right off the bat, this kit will, on the 2023, they talk about it lowering an inch in the front and 1.4 inches in the back, which would have gotten me very close to what I was looking for. However, last time I put a suspension on a car, well, actually last couple times I put a suspension on a car, the car will lower a little bit more. Things will settle in, maybe a 1/4 inch. I'm thinking we're probably going to get a 1/4 inch or so out of this, especially because the car is so new. Probably just normally the car would settle down. There are, some big rubber bushings in there, and those things are probably going to compress a little bit more over time. The springs will settle in. So I've experienced suspensions settling down more and the car actually dropping a little bit. So I think we'll get a little bit more out of this. But first measurements, 5/8 of an inch. Okay, that's it. 5/8 of an inch front, 5/8 of an inch in back. So yeah, does it look better? Yeah, definitely a reduction in the gap, but Yeah, it would have been nice to have another 3/8, at least half an inch or really more, ideally. Didn't get it, but it's better. Okay, it's better, and these springs are really not that expensive. Of course, links below. Eibach didn't send these to me. I bought these myself. No free deals here or anything like that. No discount codes, although I do have a TeslaMark discount code, which works in a lot of places, but not for these, unfortunately. So for my 2018 long range, I was able to do the Mountain Pass Performance, what do they call them? The Comfort coilovers. I've got a whole install video on that. They are fantastic. I love the ability to be able to not only adjust the ride height, but the dampening. You could adjust the compression and the rebound. Fantastic, right? However, the challenging thing with this Performance 3, the new Model 3 Performance, is that it has an adaptive suspension. So I don't want to just toss out these coilovers and put new ones in. And actually, you can't, because they're plugged in. You know, it's an active suspension, so there's electronics. It's plugged in. If you were to just replace it, you've got to unplug it. The car's going to throw all kinds of errors. It's not going to like it. So right now, the only thing you can really do is put some lowering springs in there. I was going to wait around to see what kind of solutions like Unplugged or Mountain Pass or anything offers, but I think it's going to be a little while before they come up with something where you can replace those coilovers and then, I don't know, plug in some kind of a module or something. And then the suspension you put on there has to be better than this adaptive one. And driving this around, it's nice right now to have the ability on your screen to set it to a normal, a sport, or track mode, and you feel the difference. It's not like a massive difference, but you can feel it. It's noticeable. So for this install video, now I'm going to reuse a lot of my other video. Why? Because it's the best video out there, let's face it. All right, so look, it's a good video. It's a really good, especially first-time DIY video. It goes through everything. Removal of the front coilovers, the rear, everything, jacking up the car, everything that you need to know about swapping the suspension in this car. So I'm going to reuse as much of that video as possible. However, there are some differences between this car and the older models. Again, the adaptive suspension, that's the big one. Not a ton of changes. This is actually easier than putting in an adjustable suspension because you don't have to make those adjustments. You're putting the same coilover setup that you take out, change the springs on, put it back in, so it goes in and out easier. But again, there's a few things to look out for. So the parts may look a little different in my old video, but I interject every now and then with some of the new updated things that you need to know for this car. So this video is mostly install. Stay tuned, subscribe, put the alerts on, because my next video, I'm doing some performance testing on it. Like, not a ton of performance testing, all right, but I set some cones up and we're gonna do some side-by-side comparisons of the old OEM suspension and the new suspension. We're going to look at the different levels, you know, the normal, the sport, and the track mode. See if it looks any different, you know, going in and out of the cones. I'm gonna try to describe also what I'm feeling as I'm driving with these different modes and with the whole new suspension. So please, yeah, stay tuned for that. A couple things you're going to learn in this video, all right? Through-hole ratchet, okay? Check this tool out. I'm going to show you why you probably are going to need one, and I'm going to tell you where to get it. Also, spring compressor. Spring compressors. Last time I rented one. Well, not even rental, all right? Basically, you put some money down, like a deposit, 50, 60 bucks, I don't remember, and a number of auto parts store will let you use their spring compressors for free, all right? You bring them back within 90 days and they give you your money back, okay? Free. If you don't bring them back, then they keep your money, all right? Or you can buy one from Amazon, which I did this time only because the ones I got from the auto parts store were just like a little bit beat up, and not that I felt that unsafe with it, but I just felt like new ones, I don't know, I felt a little bit better. And they're pretty inexpensive. Again, all the links down below. As a preview, I like these springs, okay? So far, I haven't driven them that much, but in the amount of driving that I've done a little bit of testing already, I like them. So please subscribe. I'm looking forward to getting the full review out to you guys. All right, let's get on with the unboxing and the install. All right, let's check this out. Eibach Pro Kit. right, check it out. Rear springs, and if you notice the coils, this typically means that you've got a dual rate spring, this being a different rate than this. These look like the front, and well, these don't look... Now, I think how they get the dual rate here is maybe here. So these are... If you see the diameter of the coils here and here, so the suspension will be a little bit more compliant with those small bumps, meaning a little more mushy to help smooth them out. So let's compare. I've got the front spring already off, the OEM spring, and yeah, wow. So like way fewer windings. Let me get this out of the way. Look at the difference there. These are thicker. You can see that they're thicker. So this must be a much higher rate coil, given that it is shorter, substantially shorter, yet this is going to actually lower the car. So that is very interesting. Let me see for weight. Yeah, I gotta say, boy, this factory spring here is a lot lighter than this. And that is a bit of a bummer. So, by the way, all of these springs weigh 41.6 pounds, according to FedEx. I'm sure the box weighs a couple pounds, but anyway, they had it at 41.6. All right, so let's get started. First thing we need to do is take the entire frunk out, which is really not that hard at all. Pop this panel out. Don't pop it off too hard, too fast, because there is a wire attached to an LED in there that needs to be unplugged. Really no big deal. Then you need to gain access to the 10mm bolts that are holding everything down. This cowl needs to come off first. It basically just pops out. Just work your hands around it and pop it up. And there is one more 10mm screw. I got a bad angle there, but there it is. Zip that out. Everything's a little bit out of order here, but I think you get the point. You basically just start pulling the frunk up all the way around. Just work your fingers around. You'll see them when you get out. There's big tabs that have it locked in place, but you really just have to pull it out. You know, again, no special tools required here. This stuff just pulls up. Next, these covers need to come off, and these panel rivets, if you've never worked with them before, just make sure you pop up the top first. Get a screwdriver in there. This one came up real easy, but that top has to come up first before you pull the whole thing out. Okay, I'm already up, putting the car up on my homemade little car ramps here. You're going to need some kind of a car ramp to put your car up on. Even if you can get your jack under there, by the time you get it up and lower the car, you know, lower the suspension, you're going to bring the car down. You might not be able to fit your jack underneath it again. Now, I don't like to jack up one corner of pretty much any car without jacking up also the same side in the back. The car kind of sits all crooked. So on the jack, I've basically got one of those hockey puck things that they sell. You could actually literally use a hockey puck, although it has a little male end that lines up on the jacking point in the rear. And I jacked the car up. I didn't. I was going to say I usually don't leave just a jack holding the car up there, although you can. I put some wood underneath the back tires also, just a couple 2x4s, and I probably set the car down on that. All right, then we just zip the lug nuts off now that they're loosened on the front. Okay, so this is the front suspension that we are going to be taking apart. What I'm pointing out here is the subframe connector on top of the coilover. It is going to come out also. We'll get into that next. This is the lower bolt on the lower control arm. We've got to then remove the sway bar link and then the knuckle. So here on the top, this is what I was talking about. I've seen videos where people are using a 13 millimeter socket that they have to grind down. If you see any normal socket is not going to fit in there to get those bolts out. If it were, it would be real easy and you could leave that subframe assembly still on the car. It would make this a little bit easier, but the way we're going to do it here is not that difficult at all. There are 4 bolts, 2 13 millimeter and 2 15 millimeter, and one of the bolts is underneath that trim piece there. You just pull the trim piece up a little bit and you can get at it. All right, first let's start removing things. This is the ABS sensor wire, and these these tabs here, these are a little bit hard to get out actually. They're long, and you've got to be careful. It's best if you use some kind of tool. But again, these are one of those things where you could start like yanking on it really hard, and then once it breaks loose, you could end up tearing that line up or at least kind of weakening it. So although I've got a tool here, I was still I was still kind of struggling to get this thing out. Yeah, and I was holding the camera at the same time, but you kind of want 2 hands in there to, again, support it. You don't want to yank that thing out and then end up tearing it up. And then there's one bolt. There's a couple other easier little tabs to pull out. Those come right out. It's really no big deal. All right, I've got another bad angle here, but I think you guys get the picture. You just take this bolt off for the ABS line, pull all those tabs out. On the other side is the brake line. You remove the 10 millimeter bolt there and just kind of set the ABS line off to the side a little bit. Okay, next we're going to work on the sway bar end link. This a lot of times comes off pretty easy. You just unscrew the nut and it's, no problem. But as you can see at the end of the bolt there, they put a Torx pattern in there so that sometimes when that nut, when you're turning the nut, it ends up turning the whole bolt also. So you're going to end up needing to put a Torx bit in there just to hold on to that bolt. So at first it looked like the bolt started spinning on me, and I've got this really cool socket ratcheting wrench that I picked up from Harbor Freight, and it's got this hole through design. So you get a nice 6-point socket on there, again with a ratcheting wrench, and you can access the center of it to put like an Allen wrench in there, or in this case a Torx bit. I did use a Torx bit in there to hold it, and then after that the bolt stopped moving, so I was just able to unscrew it completely without even holding it in. But this is a really nice tool to have. I had my older car I did some suspension work on, and the bolt was so rusted on there that I needed this wrench because a standard open-end wrench was turning on it even. It just wasn't working out well. So this is nice. Okay, what ends up happening, and this side ended up being a lot more difficult for some reason than the other side, but since only one end of the car is jacked up, the end link has tension on it. So I just let it be for now and decided to start undoing the lower control arm bolt for the bottom of the shock. So this bottom bolt is a 13/16 on both ends. And this bolt though you need to take tension off of the suspension. So you don't jack the suspension up, you kind of push down on it. If you push down on the rotor, you can then get the bolt out pretty easily. Next up is this knuckle. That is a 15 millimeter nut on one side and a Torx T50 on the other. It loosens up pretty easily. The only little trick here, something that wasn't as obvious to me, the knuckle has to be, you kind of have to squeeze it up into the upper control arm. And when you do that, it releases all the tension on the bolt. And like you see here, I just pushed on it a little bit and the bolt just came flying out very easily. So nice. Okay, time to get back up top and loosen up the 4 bolts that are holding in the top of the assembly of the coilover. 2 of these bolts are 13 millimeter, 2 are 15 millimeter. You'll figure it out. Start on removing the bolts. Keep in mind though, when you remove them, the coilover is going to drop. So remove them slowly and you can get a hand underneath there and kind of support it as you're removing the bolts. All right, so on the other side, I didn't have this hard of a time taking this link out, and it's because the car is jacked up only on one side, and there's a lot of tension here on the sway bar, because that's what it's designed to do. So I can get this big pry bar under here and take a bunch of this tension out. You can get the right angle. Ugh. All right, yeah, I didn't ruin the threads, because the other option would be, and I don't recommend this, would be to, you know, and I tried kind of lightly tapping it out, but it was under way too much tension. You know, the other option, again, would be to put the nut back on here while it's in there, and you can get a lot more force and pound it, but then the issue is it's dragging so hard on the mount here that you're going to ruin the threads. Not completely, you know, all the way around, but you know, you're going to flatten out some threads over here. So it's much better to get a pry bar under sway bar end and get the right angle so you can get this thing out. Those are some of the other things that, one of the other things that they don't really show on the other videos. A lot of them have the car jacked up nice and straight, or it's on a lift, so you don't have these issues. All right, one thing I remember, if you focus too much on the top, pulling that out, it doesn't work as well. If you focus on the bottom, pushing this bottom as far over here as you can, it gives you more room to pull this out. And then also, it helps if you keep this pushed down. This is where a helper would come in handy, but this can be done on your own. So, okay, I got the bottom part all the way over there, and this thing is heavy. It's top heavy too, so once you get the bottom over there, you'll see that this top just comes out, but you got to be careful. You know, you don't want to hit your fender in the paint, but there it is. Voila. Okay, bring the whole thing up onto your bench and remove the 3 nuts on top. They're not real tight, they come right off, no big deal. So these are your spring compressors. These aren't top-notch, high-quality spring compressors, but they're free. I've got these from Advanced Auto, and for a $50 deposit, I was able to rent them for, I think, up to 90 days. If you don't bring them back, they're yours. The only thing I would do is I recommend oiling these. It will make the compression process easier. It's going to be easier to turn the screws on it. I use 3-in-1 oil. I think in the manual for these it says to use some kind of motor oil. Compressing springs made me really nervous. This was the first time I ever have done this on my own. It turned out to really be not that big of a deal. Even these rental tools are pretty good. You know, they're pretty heavy duty overall, and I didn't see that they were going to fail in any way. So put them on, you know, on the opposite sides of the spring. Now, as a general rule with a spring compressor, you don't want to compress too many coils, because then when you uncompress the spring, you could run out of room. In other words, you can't unscrew the spring compressor enough to get it off the spring. Well, with these springs, I found that that really wasn't a big deal, because you'll see you're able to get them off the spring even if you can't unscrew the spring compressor all the way. There's still, you can unscrew it enough to bring the tension off of the compressor and then work it off of the spring. And if you don't grab enough coils, to me, there was a little too much tension left in it. The first time I did it, I think I only grabbed 4 coils on both sides, and it didn't pull the spring in enough, so there was still compression on it, and I didn't want to undo the top. I was afraid the top was going to come flying off. It might pull a couple threads off of the screw or something. Maybe it wouldn't. It probably wasn't a lot of tension, but you know, I'm just being a little paranoid probably. Now this impact driver that I had, as I said before, this is just a 1/4" driver. It's really pretty weak, but even so, it still turned this spring compressor enough to make it a lot easier. You can do this manually. I'll show how I did it manually. It's just a lot more difficult to do when you're turning a wrench because the whole thing wants to turn on you and you've got to hold it down. I ended up putting like a, just to show you how, I put a big screwdriver in the fork there just to hold it. But yeah, it's a lot of work to do it that way. And just go back and forth. Don't overdo one side. Don't put don't clamp down on one side a lot more than the other. It'll just get a little too sideways on you. Then when it looks like you've got it compressed enough, just take a look at it. Make sure that the spring doesn't look like it's really pushing on the top anymore, and you should be good to go at that point. You can then pop the cover off of the top, the dust cover off the top of the hat, and unscrew the top. When you take this top off, be careful. That's why I really checked to make sure there was still no tension on that spring pushing up on it. If you've got any tension on that spring, it's going to want to obviously push that top off, and the more tension, the more hard it's going to pop that top off on you. So just be careful. I think I even put safety glasses on at this point again. I get paranoid. These springs are, this is a lot of force. One of these springs would happen to let loose, it's going to cause a lot of damage, so just be careful. With the spring compressed, all you got to do is take the top off. The nut can be a little bit tricky. You'll see me here try to use my little impact wrench, and it wouldn't come off. So then I had to use a socket and with a lever to hold everything in place to get it off. Then I went back to the impact, and the internal the threaded rod inside started spinning. So I had to go back to my through-hole ratchet that I showed before in order to put an Allen key in the center of it and turn it that way. So this way you hold that internal threaded rod with the Allen key, and then unscrew it with the ratchet with the through hole. Without that, I'm not honestly sure how you get that off. I've seen people just zip it off initially using some kind of a impact wrench or a power tool or something, and it just zips off. Maybe if it zips off in the beginning, it'll just completely come off. But in my case, neither of them did. I had to use my through-hole ratchet both times. So there you go. When decompressing the spring, it's the same as when you compressed it. Just be careful, go slow, go switch off one side and the other, make sure the spring is decompressing equally. And then you'll see at the end here where I can't get the compressing tool off, but I'm able to just spin it off of spin the spring around and get it off. Like I said, it's not under tension, so I was able to get it off. But it is on the edge of, you know, if that thing's still under a lot of tension, I might not have been able to get it off. Okay, before I put the new spring on here, I decided to lube this up a little bit. This spins now, which is different than the factory strut, and so I decided to lube this up. And if you watch my other video on install, I'm kind of a nut with this anti-seize lube. I really didn't have anything else that would get in there that was kind of, you know, greasy. You know, I got some oil that you could spray or put in there, but if the oil's too light, it's not really going to last long. So I went from underneath and got as much as I could of this in there. And I don't know if that's going to matter at all, but I did it. So let's get this on here, and you see which side fits on there. This side is a little too wide, so it's not going to fit on here correctly. This is the only one that fits, so we're going to now compress this and put the top back on. and then get it back on the car. Next, time to get the upper control arm mount back onto the shock, and it's just those 3 nuts again. These go on at 17 foot-pounds of torque. Things probably got a little twisted during assembly, so just get a big screwdriver and twist it back, orient the shock and the upper mount correctly. Once again, I pull out the anti-seize lubricant and lube up the end link. Again, on my Acura previously, I had to cut this thing off of the car, so I really don't want to have to do that again. At this point, I went back up top and mounted the upper assembly to the fender. Again, using the 213 and 215 millimeter bolts. I just put them in loosely at this point. I didn't tighten them all the way. I wanted to still be able to move the coilover around on the bottom, move it around easier. You could probably get away with torquing them at this point, but again, I did not. You should be able to get the lower control arm bolt put in, but don't torque it down yet. That one is going to need to be torqued down with the suspension at ride height. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. Before I put the sway bar end link back in, I jacked the car up a little bit more to line up the upper ball joint and put the pinch bolt in there. And I did not torque it down yet. It will get torqued down to 41 foot-pounds, however. Then, in order to get the end link back in, I had to lower the suspension a bit and to make everything line up a little bit better. And, you know, then you can get the sway bar end link in there and everything will line up just fine. Because of how that sway bar end link is with that bolt that spins, I really wasn't able to get a torque wrench on there because I couldn't hold the center bolt with the Torx bit. And use the torque wrench. So I just basically torqued it down to feel. It felt like 72 foot-pounds, or in this case, 54 foot-pounds, because I used the anti-seize on there. Again, when you use the anti-seize, you've got to take 25% off of the torque rating, according to anti-seize. Anytime you've got any kind of lubricant on a bolt, the torque rating gets interfered with, so you have to take off. Usually it's at 20, 25 or so percent. In this case, when anti-seize, it's 25%. I went back up top at this point and torqued down the upper control arm mounting bolts. The 15mm bolts torqued to 46 foot-pounds, and the smaller 13mm bolts torque only to 26 foot-pounds. Here's where I torqued the upper ball joint, that pinch bolt, to 41 foot-pounds. Okay, so everything is torqued down except for the lower control arm bolt, and that has to be torqued down with the suspension at ride height. How do you do that? So it's really not that difficult. You just basically get your jack underneath the suspension in a spot that is not going to interfere with anything. Now, to get it to ride height, you just keep jacking it up until you see the car come off of the jack stand, the safety jack stand, a little bit. Then you know you've got the suspension is jacked up as much as it can be, and it's got as much pressure as it's going to have, maybe even a little bit more than at ride height. So once you've got it there, just torque the lower control arm bolt to 78 foot-pounds. If you happen to put any anti-seize on there, again, knock 25% off of that, and you're good to go. You can lower the control arm or lower the suspension slowly, and you know, double check all your nuts and bolts. Make sure you got everything up there or torqued to spec, and everything's tight, and you're good to go. Okay, spoke a little too soon. You've got to get the ABS line and the brake line back on. Those are those tabs. Again, they push back in, and those bolts go back on. No sweat. Then you put the wheel and tire back on, torque those lugs to 129 foot-pounds, and now you're good to go. As I warned before in the beginning of the video, when you're lowering your car down again with the wheel and tire on it, it's going to be lower. So you may need to add another 2x4 or something underneath the car, because remember, you've got the safety jack and everything in there, and you may not be able to get the jack back out from under the car if it's now a lot lower. The frunk and miscellaneous panels pretty much just pop back in. They do have to go in order though. The only small trick is to remember to keep this wire from getting pulled underneath the frunk. I just stuck it in this spot here until I put the frunk back in, and then you just pull it out. It's right there. Once lined up, everything else pops in or is screwed back down. It's simple. Okay, time to move to the rear suspension. Here, I'm going to replace the rear shock and spring, just like the front. All right, first thing is to get the lower cover off. That's just a 110mm bolt. Next, we've got to support the rear spring. So get a jack under there, and I put one of those pucks on top of the jack, just so it didn't scratch the spring perch. Anyway, just, you know, get a jack underneath there for some support, because then we're going to remove the two control arm bolts. One is for the shock and one is for the knuckle. These are both 13/16 nuts and bolts, and you may need to raise and lower the jack a little bit in order to pull those bolts out, but they come out pretty easily. And when you've got those bolts out, then slowly lower the jack. There's not a ton of tension in here, but still, just be careful. All right, this is a little bit different than the other video. I've already taken out these two lower bolts, just like the other video. Although this wants to move around, I think, differently also than my 2018. We'll get into that a little bit later. It's really not that difficult to get these two bolts out of here. but on the other side I had a little bit of a hard time getting this bolt back in, but I'll show you how it's not that big of a deal once I figured it out. Here again, the shock doesn't need to be removed, and when you take this out, this spring out, you know, you push down on this perch, you know, make note of it's not hard to get out at all, but make note of where the spring is. This part of the spring is towards you, and these locating points also, just make sure this one is toward you. Okay, so notice the difference between these two springs. This is the Eibach spring, many more coils. It's the actual steel is about, it looks to be about the same diameter. May just be because it's cleaner, but this looks a little bit thicker. It's definitely more heavy. I did weigh these. I'll put the weights on the screen, but this is almost 5 pounds heavier per spring, which is a bit of a bummer. The front springs, I probably already put the weight on those. They felt, the Eibach springs felt substantially heavier, but they were only maybe 2 pounds heavier. So, you know, that's a bit of a bummer. I hate to add weight to the car. 5 to so we're looking at about 14 pounds total additional weight. Not great. So we have to transfer these over, no big deal. And you can tell which side has to transfer over. These are about, the coils here in the bottom are about the same diameter, so that will fit this here. And we just need to spin it so that these two are lined up here. The end of the spring is lined up with that stop. Okay, and then this part here, which doesn't really stick into place. The other side, it kind of stuck in there, but the side it doesn't. No big deal. Just know it goes like this. Put this back in, and again, you know, this is a locating point that is towards you. The only thing that makes this difficult is when you don't have a helper, you need one hand to push this down, and that leaves only one hand free to hold the spring, and you know, it's a little heavy. And if you are tired like me, my hand is losing some of its strength. Otherwise, that goes in there pretty easy. I'm trying to make sure that these are spun correctly. And I did look at the indentations a little bit closer in this top part and made sure I put the new spring on in the same exact spot, although it really doesn't matter. Make sure you got everything centered up there and it's aligned. And I think that should align again with this locating hole down there. Make sure that this goes in back here, and then this should be pretty well lined up there too. And then up here, make sure that that is all lined up there too. Okay, now I'm jacking this perch back up. I've got a puck under here to kind of protect this from scratches, but you know, whatever. And I'm jacking it up first just to line up the hole from the bottom of the shock with this hole here. However, when you do that, this part here doesn't really line up perfectly with this perch as everything sits. So this will be too far that way, and as you're jacking this up, it catches on the other side. So you kind of have to jack it up slowly, and when you get to the point where it starts getting in the way, you have to kind of move this around just to make sure it's not getting jacked up, and it might the others might catch this sleeve on the other side, and you don't want to mess it up. So I think I've got it kind of lined up better, but let's see. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's not going to catch anymore. So now I just need to, oh, we're just about there. I may have gone a little bit too far actually. Okay, now I'm going to jack it up some more until we can get this in closer alignment, but you'll see it's more difficult to line up. So what I did was put a little pry bar in between here, and there's not a lot of weight or pressure on this at all. It's just, it's really difficult to move this around. And you know, the first thing you do is start grabbing a disc. Well, you end up grabbing the whatever this is, some kind of a dust cover plate thing, and you end up pulling that in, and you really don't want to bend this around too much, because you bend it too much and it's going to be touching the disc. But anyway, it's much easier to get some kind of a big screwdriver pry bar in there, and you could see this is how you get the hole to line up between that and moving the jack height around a little bit. That's how you get this bolt in. And again, just jack it up until you see the car start to rise off of the jack stand, and you'll be at ride height. Both of these bolts get torqued down to 85 foot-pounds. I put anti-seize on here again, which means again I knocked 25% off, so for me it is 64 foot-pounds. Remember to put the lower cover back on, and you are done with one side.